Hello, everybody. All right. So, we are continuing on our reading and discussion of the Abolition for the People series of essays, organized and published by Kaepernick Publishing. A series of essays examining the state of modern policing, how it's broken, and creating the case for abolition by pointing out that reform will not get us there because its core is fundamentally broken. Today, we're reading an essay by Bree Newsome Bass. She's an activist, filmmaker, musician out of North Carolina. She is known for someone who was arrested for removing a Confederate flag in South Carolina after the Charleston church shooting back in 2015. They did, as a result of the publicity of her arrest and demonstration, they did eventually remove the flag on a permanent basis. So yeah, that is Bree Newsome Bass. Right. So this particular essay is continuing part of the Fucked Reform series. These readings, while I will be reading it, I will also be interjecting my own thoughts, and it is intended as a discussion. So if anyone else has thoughts of their own or questions or anything, or just wants to interject, you're welcome to. This format is intended to be, interactive discussion and educational, so feel free to chime in. Putting a black face on police agendas. Black cops don't make policing any less black, or less anti-black. The idea that we can resolve racism by integrating a fundamentally anti-black institution in the U.S. is the most absurd notion of all. Just based on that opening line, we can this is going to parallel a little bit the rainbow washing article, which touched on how police try to appear friendly to LGBT communities while being one of the primary sources of violence against them. I suspect we're going to see similar line of thinking and a similar pattern. Amid recent growing calls for defunding police this summer, a set of billboards appeared in Dallas, Atlanta, and New York City. Each had the words, "No police, no peace," printed in large, bold letters next to an image of a black police officer. Funded by a conservative right-wing think tank, the billboards captured all the hallmarks of modern pro-policing propaganda. The jarring choice of language, a deliberate corruption of the protest chant, "No justice, no peace," follows a pattern we see frequently from proponents of the police state. Any word or phrase made popular by the modern movement is quickly co-opted and repurposed until it's rendered virtually meaningless. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of modern pro-police propaganda is reflected in the choice to make the officer on the billboard the face of a black man. This is in keeping with a narrative pro-police advocates seek to push on a regular basis in mass media. That policing can't be racist when there are black officers on the force, and that the police force itself is an integral part of black communities. When Freddie Gray died in police custody, police defenders quickly pointed out that 3 of the officers involved were black, implying that racism couldn't be a factor in a case where the offending officers were the same race as the victim. I'm going to pause there. That in and of itself demonstrates a lack of understanding of what systemic racism is. When I criticize, the police institution and even America at large of being systemically racist, that does not mean that each individual is themselves like a hood-wearing Klan member. What it means is the system itself facilitates inequity that is independent of the individuals involved. Because even if the individuals involved are all, personally opposed to racism or, and have none of that overt sentiment, they can't help but perpetrate racism and that inequity and that unequal justice by participating in that system. So in this case, yeah, sure, the officers were black, but they are participating in and perpetuating a system which is inherently anti-black. When I scaled the flagpole at South Carolina's Capitol in 2015 and lowered the Confederate flag, many noted that it was a black officer who was tasked with raising the flag to the top of its pole again. When an incident of brutality brings a city to its brink, black police chiefs are paraded to podiums and cameras to serve as the face of the United States racist police state and to symbolically restore a sense of order. One of the most frequently recommendations from police reformists is to recruit and promote more black officers. This is based on an argument that the primary problem with policing centers on a breakdown of trust between police forces and communities they have terrorized for decades. The solution then is to restore trust between the two parties by recruiting officers who resemble the communities they police. Images of police officers dancing or playing basketball with black children in economically deprived neighborhoods are often published as local news items to help drive this narrative home. The idea gained traction in the aftermath of numerous urban rebellions in the 1960s and has seen a resurgence in the wake of the 2014 Ferguson uprising. This extends beyond policing as well. One of the things that you see in from the Republican Party is anytime they are pushing a racist agenda or like their voting rights bills or anything like that, they will shove a black member of their party to the podium to speak about it so that they can't be accused of, pushing a racist policy, because how could it be racist if it has a black person supporting it? And it's fundamentally a flawed argument. I mean, you can look even like at Candace Owens, who argued that Hitler didn't, wasn't such a bad guy and was just trying to make Germany great. And says the only thing that he did wrong was look beyond Germany's borders. And it's like, that's not quite it. You can look to Ben Carson, who recently at CPAC argued that while under slavery, black people had stronger family values. And it's like, if you know your history, while families that could be held together undoubtedly did, have strong bonds, they didn't really have a lot of agency in that. Families could be torn apart just based on their owner's whims. And regularly were. So trying to defend the black family unit of the age of slavery is really a strange argument to make. But that was made as recently as, this past week. Ben Carson regularly is trotted out by Republicans as someone to sell terrible ideas. I feel that the propaganda works because folks don't see that systemic racism exists, even where those involved are aware of unconscious bias in themselves and others. Yes, I would agree with that, because understanding the mechanisms of systemic racism does take effort. And like what, as I've talked about, as one of the things that I bang on a lot, most of the electorate is politically illiterate. They don't put in the time or work, typically, to really examine or understand how things work, how the system of government works, how laws actually are put into place and enforced. The second part is very important. Most people, if things don't directly impact them or their lives, kind of just shrug and let it be. And it is a hard pill to swallow to accept there are structural incentives to maintain white supremacy. People don't want to admit that. It is an ugly realization. But yeah, it really is disturbing how the right, especially, leans on just kind of pushing their very few black members forward to promote anti-black ideas. What was it? Tim Scott recently defended something really absurd as well. He's the only black Republican senator. I don't know. They often trot him out. And it's not to say that he completely lacks agency. He obviously does believe something. It just seems that he's bought into some of these narratives that are pushed around. Even if we all admit there's a problem, the people we charge with changing it have incentive to do the opposite. Yes. Yes, with an asterisk to it. So, one of the chief problems with democracy is political illiteracy. I don't have a huge platform, but I do firmly believe that one of the biggest things that can be done to affect change is to educate everyone around you as well as possible about, everything, really. I mean, not only teaching about politics, but teaching skills and whatnot, helping people be able to, fend for themselves better. But if you have an informed and educated electorate across the board, or at least a lot more than we have today, democracy should filter out those who are just straight up bad actors. We should get better representation and better representatives. Even in a two-party system, you would see primary challengers take over some of the establishment hacks who have just been kind of sitting there being duds, riding their seat out just because it's unchallenged year after year. The problem is we do not have an informed electorate. And one side is viscerally opposed to being politically educated, which is a hurdle unto itself. But even the large majority of, the liberal electorate is very uninformed. So that's, part of that work. Or he is simply a sellout. Yeah, could be. Tim Scott could be. Anyway. Here's a photo of our heroic author, Bree Newsome. On June 27, 2015, climbed the flagpole at the State House in Columbia, South Carolina, and removed Confederate flag. I know this is back in 2015, I know it's already been dealt with, but I just want to reflect on that. A state house, an official state house. This is not some racist's backyard in the Deep South just flying the flag because he can. This is the official state house of a state flying the flag, the battle flag, that sought to destroy the Union, to defend slavery. Get that it's part of history, but you still don't fly the flags of your enemies. Doesn't make any damn sense. Germany doesn't fly the swastika just because it was part of their history. Italy doesn't fly, the Mussolini's, adjustments to the flag just because it's part of their history. There's no reason to do this unless you are still standing by the values and ideas of the Confederate States of America. Why does a piece of cloth upset people so much? Symbols are powerful. And you know, I'm reading your name. I see what your name is, and I'm letting you stay just for the moment because I know you're here to troll. But symbols are very powerful, and flags in particular are designed to declare that this group of people living here lives under this banner, which represents a thing. So, like, the Stars and Stripes, for the people that it was created for, specifically white people, stands for a very specific thing. It stands for we the people, you know, the pursuit of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, etc. Bill of Rights. All of those things which led to the formation of the Union. On the other hand, the Confederate flag stands for we want to own people who don't look like us so much that we are willing to kill our neighbors. So when you are flying that flag, you are declaring, I still believe in this. That is why a piece of cloth upsets people so much. Yeah. It was normalized in Dukes of Hazzard, and there, of course, have been a lot of efforts to distance itself from what it actually stands for, but that's just that is actually trying to erase its history and trying to turn it into just a cool, edgy symbol rather than the declaration of what the Confederate States of America stood for. Yeah. Vexillology is actually a kind of a passion of mine, which is why I get really annoyed at states and cities for really terrible flag designs, unmemorable ones, really difficult to draw ones. Like, if you were trying to just conjure up the state flag of Florida, it's a pain in the ass because you have to know exactly what the seal of Florida looks like. Don't design flags like that. Flags are supposed to be clear symbols, very basic symbols that you could, in a pinch, put together just by memory using very basic, rudimentary drawing skills if you needed to put a flag up. They're supposed to be recognizable, especially from like naval vessels far, far away. And the more memorable a flag is, the kind of the greater impact it can have. So, you know, flags are fundamentally a cool idea. And they do kind of harken to our normal innate attraction to symbols as concepts of and encapsulations of broader ideas. They're basically memes. If you get down to it, flags are basically memes. Everyone who knows what it is and can recognize it immediately. Anyway, continuing on. Protests broke out in Atlanta this past summer in response to the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. The city's black mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, held a press conference flanked by some of Atlanta's most famous and wealthy black residents. Together, they pleaded for protesters to go home and leave property alone. Soon after, Rayshard Brooks was killed by white police officers in Atlanta. The moment exposed a class divide that exists in cities all over the nation, a chasm between the image of black affluence promoted by black politicians and the black petite bourgeois middle class, and the lived realities of the majority of black residents in those cities, many of whom still face disproportionate unemployment, displacement by rapid gentrification, and policies that cater to white corporate interests. If the solution to racism were simply a matter of a few select black people gaining entry to anti-black institutions, we would see different outcomes than what we're witnessing now. But the idea that we can resolve racism by integrating what is perhaps the most fundamentally anti-black institution in the US, its policing and prison industry, is the most absurd notion of all. Okay, let's see. Well, my point is, if you wave the American flag, depending who you do it in front of, can get very different reaction. You can probably say the same for just about any flag. Letting it ruin your day seems like a waste of time. Me personally don't care which flag you wave or which flag you burn. It makes no difference to me, and it's not going to affect me in the least. I mean, that's fine. I suspect that you are not on the receiving end of anti-blackness. I assume that your family has no history being owned by other people, which makes apathy very easy for you. When I'm talking about these things, I'm not sure that what you're hearing isn't like, my day is ruined, oh no, I saw the Confederate flag. That's not it. That's not it at all. It's a criticism of a state house flying a flag that declares that in this house, a seat of government, we still support the institution of slavery. If you don't see what's wrong with that, think about it a little harder, because that's a very specific place to be flying a very specific symbol. Yeah? Now, it may not bother you personally, but I hope that you have the intellectual curiosity at least to understand how it is a deeply problematic position for a state house to take. Yeah, not only the institutions of slavery, but that there are citizens in our society that are lesser than others just because of their skin color. Exactly. The people who do not are simply wrong and haven't read the actual Declaration of Secession from the Confederated States of America. So do your research. They declared secession for that very specific purpose. It is simple history. This isn't both sides have something to say. This is the Confederated States of America fought that war specifically for that purpose. It's not something that's up for debate. You may choose to debate it with someone else. Around here, I will just say, do the actual work, do the reading, do the education, I'm not going to have that discussion. Especially, again, given your name, I've given you about as much rope as I'm willing to give. So be careful what you post next. Major issue with slavery in the US compared to just slavery is the fact that slavery in the US was a means to subjugate an entire group of people based on race. Yeah. Yeah. And just to profit off of them. It was, these people are less than us. We should be able to own them and use them as livestock to work our fields and enrich us. That was the attitude towards slavery. It held on longer in the South than the North, though there were Northern slaveholders. And America is one of the very, very few places who had a war trying to defend slavery as opposed to the other way around. The French Revolution and some of the other wars that were fought in Europe and you know, some had revolutions, some simply succumbed to the pressure, but there was a populist movement to abolish slavery, which was mostly fought against by the people against the state. In this case, it was in America's case, it was bizarrely inverted, where there was more and more pressure to release, to stop slavery, and then we had a popular uprising in the South to keep it. That wasn't really done in most places. Hey, Mona. And indeed, we were one of the last countries to actually abolish slavery. We were really late to that. And arguably, we haven't actually abolished it. We've just changed the mechanism for it. Part of the reason why calls to defund police have sent such shockwaves through the nation, prompting placement of... Okay, let's see. Nope. By libertarian. No, just not even interested. No. We're not having the... What does the Confederated flag actually mean if you're not willing to put in the work? I'm sorry. Just not. That's not what I'm here to debate. I'm willing to have a lot of discussions. I'm willing to debate a lot of subjects. But basic facts that are objectively clear in history? No, I'm not having that talk. I'm not having that discussion. So, bye. Exactly, Mona. I engaged as politely as I could, but nah. Willfully ignorant people I have no patience for. I expect an audience who is eager to learn things. And someone who says, who can say what the Confederate flag stands for? They're not willing to learn anything. I know, Mona. I know. I try to be as patient as I can. Let's see. Part of the reason why calls to defund police have sent such shockwaves through the nation, prompting placement of pro-police billboards and pushback from figures of the black establishment, is because it cuts right to the heart of how structural racism operates in the United States. At a time when the black elite would prefer to measure progress by their own tokenized positions of power and symbolic gestures like murals, the push to defund police would require direct confrontation with how the white supremacist system has been organized since the end of chattel slavery, when the prisons replaced plantations as the primary tool of racial control. Actions that may have been widely seen as adequate responses to injustice just a couple of decades ago now ring hollow to many observers who see that black people continue to be killed by a system that remains largely unchanged. Police forces represent some of the oldest white fraternal organizations in the United States. The rules of who is empowered to police and who is subject to policing are fundamental to the organization of the racial case system. Even in the earliest days of integrating police forces, black officers were often told they couldn't arrest white people. The integration of police forces does nothing to alter their basic function as the primary enforcers of structural racism on a daily basis. And the presence of black officers only serves as an attempt to mask this fact. Earlier, Mona, I was saying this article, I expected a lot of parallels to the essay that we read about police trying to rainbow wash their image, and I'm definitely seeing that they trot out what symbols they can to try and say, oh look, we're not racist, we're not anti-LGBT, we're not whatever, we're a just system. See, we have this black officer, we have this gay officer. We can't be, biased because, we have these token members. But the problem is that it is not the individuals, it is the system. Police forces in America began as slave patrols, and their primary function has always been to act in service of the white ownership class in its capitalist production. In one century, that meant policing and controlling enslaved black people, with the purview to use violence against free black people as well. In another, it involved cracking down on organized labor for the benefit of white capitalists. Receiving a badge and joining the force has been an entryway to white manhood for many European immigrants, providing them a sense of citizenship and superiority when they would have traditionally been part of the peasantry rather than the white owner class. This is an interesting observation that I had not considered before, but it is true that many waves of white immigrants especially jumped onto joining up with police forces. Like, there's this very, very common trope based in some seed of reality of like the tough like Irish cop out in New York, right? Or the tough like Italian cop. These sorts of tropes from these specific waves of immigration that took place, where rather than starting at a low rung on the ladder and trying to work their way up, one of the options was to immediately join either the military or the police. And if you badge up, then you can immediately like demand, sometimes with violence, a certain level of respect, or at least the semblance of respect. That spirit of white fraternity remains deeply entrenched in the culture of policing and its unions today, regardless of this new wave of black police chiefs and media spokespeople. Police forces became unionized around the same time various other public employees sought collective bargaining rights. However, under capitalism, their role as maintainers of race-property relations remains the same. The most fundamental rule of race established under chattel slavery was that black people were the equivalent of white property, if not counted as less than property. This relationship between race and prosperity is most overt during periods of open rebellion against the police state, where officers are deployed to use lethal force in the interest of protecting inanimate property. We see swifter and harsher punishments handed out to those who vandalize police cars than to police who assault and kill black people. This is a major reason why the press conference in Atlanta with T.I. and Killer Mike struck people as classist and out of touch with the majority black experience. Yeah. That is something that always bothers me when a protest happens as a result of someone losing their life. One of the very first things that people freak out about is, oh, but the window, it got broken. Some stuff might have gotten stolen. Oh, some tires got slashed. It's like someone's life was taken. Stuff can be replaced. Stuff can be rebuilt. But death is permanent. Death is also a complete subversion of what our justice system is supposed to be based on. We have a right to trial. We have a right to a jury of our peers. We have a right to appeal. All of these things... Resmex here, wrong game. Yeah, Vegas, I wish. All of these things exist because we believe fundamentally that we can get it wrong. What I mean by that is you have 12 jurors because you don't want a single point of failure on a sentencing. You want multiple perspectives to be represented to analyze as objectively as possible the evidence presented before them. You have them make the determination of guilt. Then you have a right to appeal, because as we've seen many, many times, sometimes new evidence could come out. Sometimes a jury straight up can be wrong, or biased, or what have you. But this system exists so that an innocent person can actually defend themselves as best they can. And so that we avoid criminalizing the innocent. So when you allow for... let me take it a step further. We have in most states even abolished the death sentence as an option. So if you create room for lethal force to be used at all, you are in essence saying we allow a single point of failure. we are trusting a single individual to make the determination of guilt and to subvert our entire system of law out of some blind obsession with the fact that police are infallible. They're not. Police can get it wrong and do very, very often. A majority of burglary cases never get resolved. An even smaller number of sexual assault cases ever actually result in a charge against it. Even a charge, not even a guilty verdict. When it says, we see harsher punishments for those who vandalize or destroy police property because the system is trying to reinforce the notion that the police are something not to be questioned. The bullshit that they're the authority and therefore can't be wrong. Exactly. And that is why also, if someone kills a police officer, even if it is in self-defense, like if they are themselves deathly afraid and fully believe that this officer is going to kill them, and they kill that officer back, they are on the hook for a life sentence without possibility of parole. No questions asked. And that seems kind of lopsided, considering that police are allowed to kill people almost without any scrutiny and only ever get even in an investigation if there is international backlash. Yeah. So, yeah, this is our heroic author being arrested after she came down the flagpole. The same pattern extends throughout the carceral state. Roughly a quarter of all bailiffs, correctional officers, and jailers are black. Hey, Sebs. No, I don't want to abolish the people. It's abolition for the people, not abolition of the people. Oh my god. Oh, Sebs. Glad to see you. Wait. Let me pop this here. If you're interested in the South American perspective, I cannot recommend Sebs enough. I learn a lot from his streams and they talk a lot about theory stuff as well, deeper stuff than I do. I don't really get into economic discussions as much on this channel. It's not really my strongest suit. Like, I recognize areas that need correction, and I can make current recommendations for that, but I don't actually look far enough for economic models to fully understand that. So, yeah. Good channel. Appreciate Sebs. Yeah. Let's see. Roughly a quarter of all bailiffs, correctional officers, and jailers are black. Yet there's no indication that diversifying the staff of a racist institution results in less violence and death for those who are held within it. That's because the institution continues to operate as designed. It is not broken, as reformists are fond of saying. The fallacy is in believing the function of police and prisons is to mete out punishment and justice in an equitable manner, and not to first and foremost serve as a means of maintaining race, gender, and class hierarchy of an oppressive society. Right. This is the point that I harp on so much, that it is This is systemic, meaning that it is structurally built into the way that policing and prisons operate. The policies themselves are what cause this inequity to be carried out. It is not... It's why I don't actually like the phrase ACAB, because while I understand what it means, I don't think that it's not effective at actually describing the problem. It makes it sound like it's individual officers who are the problem. And yeah, a lot of individual officers are. But you can replace all the officers with officers who, have never... You can clean sweep all the officers and put in people who you would say would be much more just. But the system itself will always move back towards being unjust, because that's where the incentives actually are. It's following the only road that the policies allow it to. Believing that the system is broken, rather than functioning exactly as intended, requires a certain adherence to white supremacist and anti-black beliefs. One has to ignore the rampant amount of violence, fraud, and theft being committed by some of the most powerful figures in society with little to no legal consequence, while massive amounts of resources are devoted to the hyper-policing of the poor for infractions as minor as trespassing, shoplifting, and turnstile jumping at subway stations. The Trump era has provided some of the starkest examples of this dynamic. The most powerful person in the nation and his associates have been able to break the law and violate the Constitution, including documented crimes against humanity, in full view of the public, while he proclaims himself the upholder of law and order. Wealthy celebrities involved in the college admissions bribery scandal have gotten away with a slap on the wrist for orchestrating a multi-million-dollar scheme while a dozen NYPD officers surround a black teenager, guns drawn, for the crime of failing to pay $2.75 for a subway ride. Welcome, Planning Phase Syndicate. Yeah, this is a grievance that I have a lot, but it does show that the system is operating as intended, and it's why abolition is needed. How often do we hear, like, such and such politician, doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican, has violated the law in this, that, or the other way? It's nearly a monthly occurrence. How many of them go actually to jail? How many of them actually even go to court? Very few. Very few. And it's not the police that even do it. The police are rarely involved. It's usually through, various civil court cases and, years-long litigation. The police maybe begrudgingly get involved at the very end of the trial process when they actually have to arrest the guy, at least for a week before they decide, okay, well, he's rich enough that he can just put him on house arrest and take, a small chunk of his wealth away to pay for the inconvenience, but otherwise he's free to go. And yeah, kid fails to pay $2.75 for a subway ride, gets descended on by a dozen cops, all of who bring lethal force to bear, and it does send a message. The message is, if you are not one of the capitalist owners of this country, if you are poor, and especially if you are non-white, you belong in jail, where you will have labor extracted from you for free or for pennies until you die. Special jails for rich people. They don't have specifically jails built for rich people that I'm aware of, but they do have low security jails around, which are considered better to stay in. They're still not great, and they're occupied by more than just the rich. But the rich often do get to kind of sway wherever they would actually be assigned. If there's something beyond that, I am as yet unaware of it. Of course, as I say, I don't want any prisons for anyone, but the propaganda that depicts this type of policing as being essential to public safety and order is fundamentally classist and anti-black. It traces its roots to the black codes that were passed immediately after the Civil War to control the movements of newly freed black people. It relies on the racist assumption that black people would run amok and pose a threat to the larger society if not kept under the constant surveillance of a police force that has authority to kill them if deemed necessary, and with virtual impunity. That's why we are inundated with a narrative that depicts the police officer who regularly patrols predominantly black communities as being an essential part of maintaining order in society. Seb says, I'm pretty sure it's how you said, the low security jails are the nice ones and rich people tend to go there. Yes. Yeah, I don't think that there's like a special like resort jail for rich people, but there are low security jails, and rich people have a lot of ability to exert influence over where they will get jailed. So they'll go to a low security jail. Because they'll be like, look, I'm a tax fraud guy, so, I'm not a threat to anyone. Also, I'm white, so I'm not a threat to anyone. And the judge says, oh, that's a good point. You're white and rich, so yeah, you're not a threat to anyone. Meanwhile, the millions of people that this rich person, made destitute are actually sometimes dying of poverty and hunger. So much for not being a threat. Sure, they might not be a physical threat, but they're damn well a threat. One of the primary talking points against calls to defund and abolish police is that black communities would have no way of maintaining peace and order, and that a state of chaos would ensue. In wealthier neighborhoods, if an officer is present at all, they're most likely positioned by a gate at the top of the neighborhood to monitor who enters. Meanwhile, the officer assigned to the predominantly black communities is there to keep a watchful eye on the residents themselves and to ensure that they are contained in their designated place within the larger city or town. So I want to detour to a subject that I've talked about before, because this bears mentioning again, especially in context of this. Yes, if you go through white neighborhoods, you don't see cops just patrolling. And they don't want to patrol. Because they might see a crime. And they don't want to see a crime in a white neighborhood. They don't want to see, people trading or doing drugs. They don't want to see people causing disturbances. They don't want to see the fights. But these do happen in white neighborhoods. But again, they don't want to see it. They don't want to have to make the arrest or even make the intervention. So they don't patrol there. Crime is not what people are led to believe crime is. Crime is a numbers game, and it is based on what and who you want to criminalize. If you want to justify your department, you need, and expanding your department and getting more cops, you need to do that by generating crime. It is police who generate crime by going where they can to make whatever arrests they can create. And they'll go for the neighborhoods where that's easiest to do that, where people have the least means to fight back. Not just physically, but more importantly, litigiously. They don't want a court case with someone who can afford a good lawyer. They will go to poor neighborhoods. Poor neighborhoods, because of our economic policies, are going to be the ones predominantly populated by black and brown people. Ergo, the incentive is make arrests on these people because we know the arrests can stick. They cannot fight back legally. And if they fight back physically, we get to shoot them. And that is how we justify our positions, and we expand our department, and we look good because, hey, look, you need us. Look at all this crime. Look at this crime that is never changing. It's only ever growing because we over-patrol. The number of arrests is a terrible statistic to base the state of a neighborhood on, but it is what's used because it allows the police to dictate who are dangerous and who are not. It's all a numbers game. Like, that's all it is. And when you look at it from a gamified perspective, you can understand how you could manipulate those numbers to say whatever you wanted. I can say myself, when I went to a private, almost exclusively white school, I got just as many offers to buy marijuana and other drugs there as I did when I went to a black integrated school, or not a public integrated school. But the private school didn't have an officer, patrolling everywhere and knocking skulls. The public school did. It's something to think about. The current political divide on this issue falls exactly along these lines, separating those who think the system is simply in need of reform and those who correctly define the problem as the system itself. The reality is that black people fall on both sides of this divide, which is why we find so many black officers in uniform arguing for a reformist agenda, even as every reform they propose is vociferously opposed by the powerful majority white police unions and most of the rank and file. Reformists remain committed to preserving the existing system, even though the idea of reforming it to be the opposite of what it was designed to be is an unproven theory that's no more realistic than the idea of abolishing police altogether. Scrapping the system and rebuilding it from the ground up, as I've talked about from a programmer's analogy, is often a much easier path than trying to wrangle a program that was designed to do one thing and try and spaghetti code it into doing something completely different. That is very difficult to do. Just build the tool the right way. Get rid of this. It's not going to do what we want it to do. Get rid of it. Build what we want. The most pressing question remains, why are we seeking to integrate and reform modern manifestations of the slave patrols and plantations in the first place? In Mississippi and Louisiana, state penitentiaries are converted plantations. What is a reformed plantation, and what is its purpose? We must remember that many of these so-called reforms are not new. For as long as the plantation and chattel slavery systems existed, there also existed black slave owners, black overseers, and black slave catchers who participated in and profited from the daily operations of white supremacy. The presence of these few black people in elevated positions of power did nothing to change the material conditions of the millions of enslaved people back then, and it makes no greater amount of sense to believe they indicate a shift in material conditions for black people now. This is a great point, and this needs to be hammered anytime someone tries to say, oh, but there are black cops. Oh, but there were black slave owners as well. That's not a defense of cops or slavery. Having a black participant does not immediately absolve it of its racial intent. It didn't end slavery, and the same argument is flawed if trying to make it towards policing. Fantastic point to end on. Yes, so that was Bree Newsome Bass's putting a black face on police agendas. Excellent essay. As always, I find these so informative, so insightful. Thank you, Bree Newsome, for your words, your thoughts, and your protest, and your yeah. She's done a lot of speaking. As I said, she's also a filmmaker and musician. If you want to look into her work some more, I'll try and find some samples to throw in the Discord. Yeah. Eye-opening essay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sticking it out, Jane Fontaine. So let's go ahead and shift gears here.